It started in a locker room that smelled like eucalyptus and denial. I was standing in front of a full-length mirror at a boutique gym on the Upper West Side, wrapped in a white towel that cost more than my first car payment. My Pilates class had ended 10 minutes ago. My muscles were trembling in that satisfying, look at me still trying kind of way. That's when I saw it. Not on a shirt. Not in my home. On his neck. A soft blur of red, just below Daniel's jawline, blooming against his skin like a secret that got lazy. Lipstick. Not mine. I stopped wearing reds after 55. Reds demand optimism. I've learned to negotiate with neutrals. I stared at the mirror, at him behind me, at the woman I had become, a woman who lifts weights 3 times a week, not to look young, but to prove she hasn't disappeared yet. Daniel, 42, my husband, was toweling his hair with the confidence of a man who still thinks mirrors are allies. "You done?" he asked. "I've got a lunch thing. Big one." Of course he did. Men always fuck before important lunches. It sharpens their sense of importance. I turned slowly, pretending to adjust my towel, giving myself time to examine the mark. It wasn't aggressive, it was careless. Whoever left it didn't think she needed to hide. That's the arrogance of youth or ambition. Sometimes they smell the same. I could have said something right then. I could have laughed. I could have asked him whose mouth had been that close to his skin. Instead, I smiled. "Yeah," I said. "Just admiring the lighting. It's very forgiving." He grinned. "You look amazing." I always did to him. Amazing was safe. Amazing meant not a threat. We walked out together into the cafe area, where women my age sipped green juice like pennants. Daniel ordered an espresso. I watched him from across the table, his face still glowing with the kind of satisfaction that doesn't come from exercise. He leaned in to kiss my cheek. I smelled her before I felt it. A floral note. Young. Loud. Impatient. Layered poorly over his expensive cologne, like someone trying to rewrite a classic. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm great," I said. "You smell energetic." He laughed, already checking his phone. Someone was waiting. Someone who thought she'd just won something. As we stood to leave, Daniel shrugged off his jacket and handed it to me without thinking. A habit. I took it, folded it over my arm, and there it was, on the crisp white collar, the same red, clearer now. Smiling at me. Time slowed, not dramatically but practically, like my brain had opened a separate file labeled "Use Later." I didn't confront him. I didn't expose him. I didn't ask a single question. At 59, you understand that information is a gift, and gifts are best opened in private. I draped the jacket over my arm, kissed his cheek back, and watched him walk away. Young, confident, unaware that he'd just handed me the most cooperative evidence of his life. I sat there alone for a moment, the cafe noise fading into background static. Then I thought of my kitchen, of the organic grocery store down the block, of a small glass bottle I'd seen there many times before. Garlic oil. I smiled into my coffee. When you marry a younger man, people assume you're trying to steal time. They imagine desperation, Botox, late-night Googling of collagen supplements. They don't imagine this. That sometimes you marry younger because you are tired of men your age who confuse stagnation with wisdom. Daniel wasn't like that, at least not at first. We met at a charity panel I moderated, one of those events where everyone pretends to care deeply while waiting for wine. He was sharp, attentive, deferential in a way that felt flattering without being obvious. He listened to me like I was still relevant. That alone should have been a red flag. Men don't listen like that unless they want something. I was 54 then. Recently divorced, financially independent, emotionally bruised but functional. I told myself I wasn't naive. I was selective. Daniel told me I was brilliant. He said he liked women who'd already lived. I liked being admired without being needed. The age gap became a party trick. At dinners, people leaned in when they learned the numbers, as if we were performing a tasteful magic act. Daniel played his role beautifully, the younger husband who adored his accomplished wife. I was proof of his depth, he was proof of my courage. It worked, until it didn't. Somewhere along the way, admiration curdled into something quieter. Daniel still praised me, but now it felt rehearsed. Compliments delivered like bullet points, efficient, predictable. The kind you give when you don't want to be questioned. He started needing an audience more than a partner. Every room we entered, I could feel him scanning for reflections, mirrors, eyes, approval. I noticed how he leaned forward when younger women laughed, how his posture changed when someone mistook him for the successful one. Once, at a dinner party, a woman asked what he did. Daniel answered confidently. Then she turned to me and asked, "And you?" He jumped in before I could speak. "She's being modest," he said, smiling. "She's kind of a big deal." Kind of. I laughed it off. That's what women my age do best. We sand down the sharp moments so no one cuts themselves on our disappointment. At home, things stayed polite. Sex didn't vanish. It thinned, became scheduled, strategic. Daniel still touched me like I mattered, but his mind was often elsewhere, vibrating softly in his pocket. I told myself this was normal. Men in their 40s panic quietly. Women in their 50s rationalize loudly, in their own heads. That morning at the gym cafe, watching him walk away with my jacket over my arm, it finally landed. I hadn't married a younger man. I'd married a man who needed witnesses, and somewhere along the way I'd stopped being one. I finished my coffee slowly, bitter, over-extracted, the way I'd started to like it. Around me, women discussed trainers, trips, grandchildren. I folded Daniel's jacket carefully, like you do with things you plan to return. Not yet, but eventually. Outside, the city moved at its usual speed, indifferent to my revelation. I stood, adjusted my posture, and caught my reflection in the cafe window. I didn't look young. I didn't look broken. I looked observant, and that I was starting to realize was far more dangerous. The grocery store was quiet in the way expensive places always are. Soft lighting, wide aisles, music chosen by someone who thought silence was aggressive. I went there often. It was 2 blocks from our apartment and specialized in ingredients that promised virtue. Organic, cold-pressed, ethically sourced guilt. I pushed my cart slowly, like a woman who had nowhere urgent to be, because urgency invites mistakes. I didn't come for revenge, not yet. I came for clarity. The olive oils were lined up like a pretentious art exhibit. Single origin, hand-harvested, notes of pepper, almond, grass. I lifted one bottle, read the label, put it back. None of them felt honest enough. Then I saw it. Garlic oil. A small glass bottle, unassuming, no poetry on the label, just facts. Garlic, oil, strong enough to announce itself before you did. I unscrewed the cap and smelled it. Immediate, blunt, unapologetic. It reminded me of my grandmother's kitchen, where nothing was hidden and everything lingered. Garlic doesn't flirt. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't pretend to be subtle for the sake of being liked. Neither, I realized, did the truth. I stood there longer than necessary, holding the bottle, thinking about Daniel's jacket folded neatly on the chair at home, thinking about the red smile on the collar, thinking about the lunch he'd mentioned so casually, full of people who believed he was charming, ambitious, and, most importantly, safe. Garlic oil doesn't wash out easily. That mattered. At the register, the cashier scanned my items without looking up. Kale, lemons, garlic oil. She didn't know she was participating in something ceremonial. Most people never do. Back home, the apartment felt larger than usual, quieter. Like it was holding its breath with me. Daniel wouldn't be back until evening. I had time. Time sharpens intention. I hung his jacket carefully over the back of a dining chair, like a patient awaiting surgery. The lipstick mark was still there, defiant in daylight. Less romantic now. Almost cheap. I didn't rush. I poured a drop of garlic oil onto my fingertip. Just one. I wasn't trying to ruin the fabric. I wasn't trying to leave evidence. This wasn't vandalism. It was editing. I rubbed the oil gently into the collar, right where the lipstick had kissed. The scent bloomed instantly. Warm, invasive, impossible to ignore. It didn't erase the red. It reframed it. I washed my hands, twice, sat down, waited for the smell to settle into the cotton like a memory that refuses therapy. People think revenge is loud, explosive, cathartic in a cinematic way. But the most effective kind is quiet and patient, the kind that lets someone walk confidently into their own undoing. Daniel would wear that jacket again. Of course he would. It was his favorite. He liked how it made him look established without looking old. He liked that I'd bought it for him. I imagined him later, leaning in close to someone important, smiling, speaking softly. I imagined the pause, the subtle shift, the instinctive step backward from whoever caught the scent first. Garlic doesn't accuse, it announces. I put the bottle back in the pantry next to the olive oil I never liked and closed the door. Then I did something unexpected. I cooked dinner. Nothing elaborate. Pasta, garlic, too much of it. I ate alone at the table, the apartment filled with a smell that felt suddenly protective. For the first time since the gym, I didn't feel old. I felt prepared. Daniel came home late, which meant nothing and everything at the same time. I was in the kitchen pretending to read an article I'd already skimmed twice, something about longevity. I laughed quietly at the irony. When the door opened, he sounded pleased with himself, the soft confidence of a man whose day had gone exactly as planned. "Hey," he said, dropping his keys. "You eat?" "Yes," I answered. "I saved you some, in case you wanted grounding." He smiled at that. Didn't ask what I meant. Men rarely do. He showered. I listened to the water run, steady and careless. When he came out, towel around his waist, he looked relaxed, loose. The way men do when they believe nothing in their lives is about to change. "I've got that lunch tomorrow," he said, opening the closet. "The one I mentioned." "I remember," I said. "You said it was important." "It is," he replied. "Margaret Klein will be there." I paused, just for a fraction of a second, enough to note the name, enough to file it. "Margaret Klein," I repeated lightly. "That is important." He didn't notice the shift in my tone. Or maybe he did and decided it wasn't worth interrogating. He reached for the jacket. The jacket. I watched him slip his arms into it, watched him smooth the collar, watched him admire himself in the mirror. The smell hit immediately. Not dramatic, not cartoonish, just present. Like someone had opened a door to a kitchen 2 rooms away. Daniel frowned slightly, sniffed the air once, then dismissed it. "Did you cook something?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Garlic." He laughed. "Of course you did." "Of course I did." He leaned in to kiss me before leaving the bedroom. The scent rose between us, unmistakable now. I didn't flinch, I didn't move. I let it sit there, between our mouths, like a third participant. "You smell nice," he said automatically. I almost corrected him. Almost, but that would have been rude. In the elevator, we stood side by side. A young woman stepped in on the 4th floor. She glanced at Daniel, smiled politely, then hesitated. Her smile tightened. She shifted her weight. The doors closed. Daniel checked his phone. I watched the reflection in the mirrored wall, how his confidence stayed intact, how nothing had registered yet. Garlic works on a delay, like consequences. At the lobby, he stepped out first. I followed, slower. "Wish me luck," he said. "I don't think you'll need it," I replied. He walked away, jacket crisp, posture straight, carrying with him a scent that refused to be ignored. Back upstairs, the apartment felt calm. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window, watching the street below. Somewhere between traffic lights and lunchtime reservations, Daniel was heading toward a room full of people who mattered to him. People who believed in impressions. I imagined the first moment, the polite greetings, the handshakes, the subtle lean-ins that come with power. I imagined the pause, so small it would almost be missed, when someone caught the smell and recalibrated. Not disgust. Curiosity. Garlic doesn't scream scandal, it whispers unintentional intimacy. I sat down at the table and opened my laptop. Not to spy, not to plot, just to work, to exist in my own timeline. At some point, my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Running late. Big conversation." I smiled at the screen. Yes, I thought, it certainly was. Daniel always said he could read a room. That was one of the things that made him good at what he did. He understood tone, timing, posture. He knew when to lean in, when to laugh, when to let silence do the work. It was a skill he was proud of, a skill that had made him successful. Which is why I like to imagine this part clearly. The room didn't change all at once. It never does. Power rooms are trained to absorb disruption quietly, like expensive carpet. He would have arrived early. He always did. Early enough to establish presence without looking eager. He would have greeted the host, adjusted his jacket, offered that familiar smile that said, "I belong here, even if I'm not the oldest man in the room." The first handshake would have gone fine. The second, too. Then someone would have leaned in slightly closer than necessary. A reflex. A habit. And that's when it would have happened. The brief pause. The micro-expression. Not disgust. Confusion. They wouldn't pull away dramatically. That would be impolite. They would simply recalibrate their distance by half an inch. Daniel wouldn't notice. At least not at first. He'd sit down, cross his legs, place his napkin carefully. He liked rituals. Rituals make men feel earned. The conversation would start. Markets, strategy, some shared joke about how everyone's exhausted but grateful. And then the smell would settle. Garlic doesn't rush, it waits until people relax. Someone would tilt their head. Another would clear their throat. A woman across the table, someone who prided herself on composure, would subtly bring her glass closer to her face as if scent were contagious. Daniel would sense a shift, he always did, but he'd misread it. He'd assume nerves, competition, respect maybe. He'd speak. That's when it would really land. Because garlic blooms with warmth, with breath, with proximity. Words carry it forward. Someone would smile too quickly. Someone else would glance down at their plate and suddenly find it fascinating. A chair would scrape back, not enough to be rude, just enough to breathe. Daniel would finally register something was off. He'd adjust his collar. Too late. He might even laugh lightly and say something self-deprecating. He was good at that. But garlic doesn't respond to charm. It doesn't care how articulate you are. It just keeps telling the truth. Across the table, Margaret Klein would notice. Not because she was sensitive. Because she was trained. Margaret didn't react to noise. She reacted to patterns. She'd look at Daniel differently, not suspiciously, not accusingly, just with interest that had cooled. She would listen without leaning in. She would ask fewer follow-up questions, the kind of subtle withdrawal that leaves no fingerprints. Daniel would leave the lunch unsettled but intact. No confrontation, no scene, just a sense that something hadn't gone as planned. He'd check his phone afterward, maybe even text me. Weird lunch. Hard to read the room. I imagined that message arriving. I imagined not answering right away. Because by the time he started wondering what had changed, the room already had. Back at home, I went about my afternoon deliberately. I watered the plant by the window. I folded laundry with precision. Ordinary acts feel different when you know they're happening in parallel with consequence. I wasn't celebrating. This wasn't victory. This was calibration. Daniel didn't lose anything that day. Not officially. He wasn't humiliated. He wasn't exposed. What he lost was subtler and far more dangerous. Momentum. And in rooms like that, momentum is everything. When my phone finally buzzed, I looked at the screen. Running later than expected. Of course you are, I thought. Rooms don't forget. They just move on. And for the first time since I married him, I was no longer worried about where Daniel stood. I was curious about where he'd fall. Margaret Klein called me 3 days later. Not directly. She never did anything directly unless it was a firing. Her assistant sent a short email. Polite, vague, impossible to refuse. Margaret would love to catch up. Coffee? No context. No urgency. Which, coming from her, was the context. We met at a hotel lounge downtown, the kind with low light and chairs designed to make everyone sit up straighter. Margaret was already there when I arrived, hands folded around a porcelain cup, posture immaculate. She looked exactly the same as she had 10 years ago, which meant she looked like someone who had outlived several trends on purpose. "Eleanor," she said, standing to greet me. No hug, just a nod. Respect without warmth. I preferred it that way. "Margaret." We sat. Ordered coffee. She waited until the server left before speaking. "Your husband," she said calmly, "was at a lunch last week." I didn't respond. Silence is useful when you want to see how much someone already knows. "He's charming," she continued, "very confident, a bit eager." I smiled faintly. "That sounds like him." Margaret studied me over the rim of her cup. "He smelled," she said simply. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I raised an eyebrow. "Did he?" "Yes," she said. "Not unpleasant. Just distracting. People notice distractions." She took a sip. "So do I." There it was. Not an accusation. An opening. "I assume," I said carefully, "this isn't about his choice of cologne." "No," Margaret replied. "It's about judgment." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Margaret had built her entire career on knowing when to stop listening. When someone shows poor judgment in small, intimate ways, it tends to leak into larger ones. She leaned back slightly. "There's a young woman in his orbit," she said. "Chloe." I kept my face neutral. Inside, something clicked into place with satisfying precision. "She's ambitious," Margaret went on. "Talented enough. But ambition without discretion is messy." I nodded. "It usually leaves stains." Margaret's mouth twitched. That was as close as she came to smiling. "She's been angling for opportunities she hasn't earned yet," Margaret said. "Dropping names, crossing lines, I don't reward that." She paused. I wanted to know if this situation was going to become loud. There it was. The only question that mattered. "No," I said. "I don't do loud." Margaret exhaled almost imperceptibly. "Good." We sat in silence for a moment. Around us, the low murmur of business conversations continued, people trading futures like weather predictions. "I won't interfere in your marriage," Margaret said finally. "That's not my role. I wouldn't ask you to. But," she continued, "I am very particular about the environments I maintain. Chloe won't be moving forward, not here, not anywhere adjacent." She said it like a scheduling note, not a threat, a fact. "I understand," I replied. Margaret stood, signaling the meeting's end. "One more thing," she added. "Your husband relies heavily on reflected credibility." "Yes," I said, "he always has." She met my eyes. "Reflections only work when there's something solid to bounce off." Then she picked up her bag and walked away, leaving me with a half-finished coffee and a sudden, unfamiliar feeling. Relief. Not because someone was taking care of it, but because I hadn't imagined the power I still carried. I hadn't lost it. I'd simply stopped using it. Daniel came home irritated, which was new. Not angry, not defensive. Irritated in the way men get when the world fails to mirror them correctly. His jacket went on the chair instead of the hanger. His shoes missed their usual alignment by an inch. Small signs. I catalogued them quietly, like a hobby I'd recently taken up. "Long day?" I asked. He exhaled. "You could say that." I waited. Silence does more work than questions. "They keep saying the lunch went fine," he continued, pacing. "But something was off. You ever get that feeling?" "Constantly," I said. "It's called being alive." He ignored the comment. People were weird, distant, like they were holding something back. I nodded sympathetically. "That happens." He stopped pacing and looked at me then. Really looked, as if searching for the correct angle. "You don't think," he began slowly, "that I'm aging out, do you?" There it was. Not guilt, not remorse, fear. "No," I said gently. "You're only 42. He relaxed slightly, then tightened again. "Because sometimes I feel like they still see me as—" He gestured vaguely. "Not fully established." I smiled. "That's ambitious men for you. Always auditioning." Something flickered across his face. Annoyance, maybe, or suspicion. "You've been distant lately," he said, quiet. "I've been observant," I corrected. He laughed lightly. Too lightly. "You're overthinking things." "Ah, the classic." "I don't think so," I said, "but you're welcome to explain." He sighed, sat down across from me like we were entering a negotiation. "I just wonder if maybe this phase is hard for you." "Which phase?" "You know," he said, avoiding my eyes, "this stage of life." I almost admired the efficiency of it. One sentence, carefully constructed, designed to reposition me as the problem. Not accusatory, concerned. "It must be strange," he went on, "being married to someone younger, seeing everything shift." I leaned back in my chair. "Is that what you think this is about?" "I think," he said, choosing his words, "that sometimes insecurity can color perception." There it was, gaslighting, served warm and reasonable. I considered correcting him, laying out facts, naming names, but that would have been premature. Instead, I softened. "You might be right," I said quietly. He blinked. "I might?" "I've been feeling invisible lately," I admitted. Not a lie, just incomplete. "Maybe I'm projecting." Relief washed over his face. Men relax quickly when women take responsibility for their discomfort. He reached for my hand. "I just don't want you spiraling." Spiraling. Such an economical word. It turns clarity into pathology. "I appreciate your concern," I said. "I'll work on it." He smiled. A real one this time. Victory smiles are always genuine. That night, he slept easily, curled toward me, trusting. I lay awake, listening to his breath, thinking about Margaret's voice, about Chloe's closed doors, about how Daniel still believed he was steering this conversation. The next morning, he was affectionate. Overly so. Compliments returned, thicker now, like insulation. He texted during the day, checked in, performed reassurance. I responded appropriately. Warm, calm, receptive. Because when someone believes you've accepted their version of reality, they stop defending it. That's when the truth gets room to move. I watched him leave for work, younger than me, confident again, unaware that the ground beneath him had already been rezoned. He thought he'd made me feel old. What he'd actually done was remind me of something crucial. I had survived men like him before, back when I had far less to lose. Chloe didn't disappear all at once. Careers like hers rarely implode. They thin out. Invitations dry up. Emails go unanswered. Calendars become strangely spacious. It's the professional equivalent of hypothermia. You don't notice it until you're already numb. Daniel mentioned her name less frequently at first. Then not at all. which, considering how often she'd come up before, casually, admiringly, always followed by "she's sharp," was noticeable. I noticed everything. One evening, while he scrolled through his phone with a faint crease between his brows, I asked lightly, "How's that team you were excited about?" He shrugged. "Restructuring." "Ah," I said. "That word covers a lot." He glanced at me, suspicious, then returned to his screen. "Chloe's looking for new opportunities, actually." I kept my voice neutral. "Already?" "She says things are stalled." Stalled. Another efficient word. No villain, no blame, just frictionless failure. I thought of Margaret's voice in the hotel lounge. Calm, decisive. I am very particular about the environments I maintain. Margaret didn't yell. She curated. Over the next week, the signs accumulated. Daniel stopped bringing his jacket home draped with careless confidence. He checked his appearance more often. Adjusted, corrected, overcompensated. One night, after 2 glasses of wine, he said, "It's strange how fast things change." "They do," I agreed. "Usually when someone notices patterns." He laughed, but it landed wrong. "You sound like Margaret." I looked up. "Do I?" "She said something similar at the follow-up meeting," he continued. "About optics. Optics, the polite cousin of consequences." "What did she say exactly?" I asked. He hesitated. "That talent without discretion is risky." I smiled faintly. "She's always been consistent." Daniel stared into his glass. "She didn't even mention Chloe by name, just—" He waved his hand vaguely. "Reprioritized." Reprioritized was Margaret's favorite verb. It meant you no longer exist in the way you thought you did. The next morning, Daniel left early. Came back late. He was quieter now, not in a sulking way but in a recalibrating one. Men like him don't panic immediately, they reassess value, and I was being reassessed. He started asking questions again. Not accusatory, curious, where I was going, who I was seeing. Whether I'd spoken to Margaret recently. "Not lately," I said truthfully. "We didn't speak often. We didn't need to." Chloe, on the other hand, was making noise, not publicly, privately. Daniel's phone buzzed more often. He stepped into other rooms to answer. He came back irritated, drained, suddenly older. "She's upset," he said one night, as if that explained everything. "I'm sure," I replied. "Transitions are hard." He studied me then. "You're very calm about all this." "I've had practice," I said, watching doors close. He didn't respond. A few days later I saw Chloe for the first time since the gym cafe. By accident. Or what passes for accident in a city like ours. She was sitting at a table near the window of a co-working space, laptop open, posture tense. No entourage, no laughter. Just a woman working very hard to look unbothered. She looked smaller. I walked past without slowing, without acknowledgement. Power doesn't require eye contact. That night, Daniel came home hollowed out. "Things didn't work out," he said quietly. "With Chloe?" I asked. He nodded. "Professionally. And personally." He didn't answer. I reached for my wine glass. "Sometimes," I said gently, "when environments clean themselves, people take it personally." He looked at me like he wanted to ask something, like he was starting to understand there were conversations happening without him. Careers end loudly in movies. In real life, they end politely. And Daniel was just beginning to realize that politeness could be lethal. Daniel didn't fall apart. He thinned. His confidence lost weight first. The way he stood in doorways, no longer blocking them. The way he waited half a second longer before speaking, as if checking whether his opinion still had clearance. He smiled less with his eyes. Men don't notice these changes in themselves. They notice them in how others respond. And others were responding differently now. He stopped being invited to things he used to describe as casual but important. Those gatherings where nothing is decided officially, but everything is decided socially. He told himself it was timing, market shifts, bad quarter. He told me this while watching the news, as if the anchor might confirm it. I listened the way I always had, attentive, neutral, useful. One evening he asked, "Do you think Margaret's pulling back from me?" The question landed between us, fragile and exposed. I said carefully, "that she pays attention to patterns." He nodded, swallowing. "I didn't do anything wrong." "I know," I said, "and I meant it." Wrong implies rules everyone agrees on. Daniel poured himself a drink he didn't finish. "I feel like I'm suddenly provisional. Provisional, temporary." The word tasted new to him. I thought of our early days, how people used to look at me when he entered the room. Curious, impressed. How I'd felt briefly upgraded by proximity to youth. I'd been a mirror once, a generous one. Now the mirror was gone. He tried to reassert himself at home. Small things. Correcting me on details I already knew. Offering unsolicited advice. Suggesting changes. Men reclaim control wherever they can reach it. I let him, because control, when isolated, becomes obvious. A week later, he came home with papers in his bag. Not hidden, not announced, just present. He left them on the counter while he showered. I didn't touch them. When he returned, hair damp, he gestured vaguely. I've been thinking about options. Options, I repeated. For both of us, he added quickly. Just planning, being smart. I nodded. Planning is smart. He looked relieved. You've always been reasonable. There it was again. Reasonable. The compliment men give when they hope you won't ask for more. That night, I slept deeply. The kind of sleep that comes when a decision has already been made by the body, even if the mind is still catching up. In the morning, I called my lawyer, not because I was angry, not because I was hurt, but because leverage once lost doesn't return on apologies. The meeting was efficient. My lawyer asked questions Daniel would have hated, about finances, timelines, contributions. I answered calmly. I had receipts. I always had. When Daniel noticed the shift, it was already too late to name it. You've changed, he said one night, almost accusingly. Yes, I agreed. I have. He studied me, searching for the woman who used to soften his edges. She wasn't there. In her place sat someone older, quieter, and far more precise. I don't know where I stand anymore, he said. I looked at him, young, unsettled, suddenly unsure of his footing. That, I replied gently, is what standing without leverage feels like. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. For the first time since we married, the imbalance had shifted. Not dramatically, not cruelly, just enough. And that was all it ever took. The divorce was quiet. No shouting, no dramatic exits, no friends choosing sides like it was a sporting event. Just two adults sitting across from each other at a polished table, pens moving steadily, lives being separated into columns. Daniel looked smaller in that room. Not younger, just reduced. Like a man who'd mistaken proximity for ownership and was now learning the difference. He tried once. Near the end. You're really okay with this? He asked, searching my face for cracks. I'm okay with reality, I said. I've had time to get acquainted with it. He nodded, slowly. Men like Daniel accept outcomes better than explanations. When it was done, I walked out alone. The city greeted me the way it always had, indifferent, busy, full of people carrying their own versions of loss and relief in equal measure. I felt lighter, but not euphoric. Euphoria is temporary. Clarity lasts longer. I moved into a smaller apartment. 1 bedroom, big windows, a kitchen that caught the afternoon sun just right. No need to impress anyone, no need to curate myself into something legible. The first night there, I cooked, nothing complicated. Pasta, olive oil, garlic, too much garlic. The smell filled the space immediately, warm, grounding, unmistakable. It didn't bother me anymore. It never had. What bothered others had always been its honesty. I ate at the counter, barefoot, listening to the city breathe through the open window. Somewhere below, a couple argued softly. Somewhere above, music played. Life, unedited. Margaret sent a brief message a week later. I hope you're well. Nothing more. That was her way. Influence doesn't linger where it's no longer required. Chloe's name never surfaced again. As for Daniel, he reached out once. A polite email, reflective. Apologetic in that vague way that asks for absolution without demanding accountability. I didn't reply. Not out of bitterness. Out of completion. People assume revenge needs a witness, an audience, a moment where someone finally understands what they lost. It doesn't. The most effective ending is the one where you no longer need them to understand anything at all. On Sunday mornings, I walk to the cafe down the street. The barista knows my order. We talk about nothing important. I write sometimes, not for publication, just to see my thoughts behave on the page. Occasionally, a man tries to flirt with me, politely, carefully, as if testing water temperature. I smile. Sometimes I say thank you. Sometimes I don't. I'm not closed. I'm just no longer available for projection. In the evenings, I cook. I open a bottle of wine. I use garlic oil without irony or intent, just because I like the way it tastes, the way it stays. At 59, I've learned this. Youth is loud. Power is quiet. And freedom has a smell you recognize the moment you stop apologizing for it. I didn't ruin anyone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg. I didn't compete with youth. I simply stepped out of the role that made their story possible. And if there's a lesson in all this, it's not about marriage or betrayal or age. It's this: when the truth finally enters the room, it doesn't need permission, it just needs time. And sometimes, a little garlic. People think healing is loud. They expect breakthroughs. Tears in the rain. A final line that sounds good in a movie trailer. But healing, I've learned, is mostly administrative. It's changing passwords, returning keys, relearning how quiet your life can be without feeling empty. Months passed without ceremony. I stopped flinching when my phone buzzed. I stopped explaining myself to people who asked careful questions, the kind designed to extract a confession. Eventually, I stopped thinking of the past as something that required defending. The gym locker room lost its power. So did the cafe, the jacket, the smell that started it all. They became objects again, neutral, harmless. What replaced them wasn't excitement. It was steadiness. I slept better. I laughed more easily. I started walking without checking reflections in windows. When I cooked for hunger, not symbolism. Garlic stayed in my pantry because it belonged there, not because it meant anything. One afternoon, I ran into a woman I used to know from my old life. She looked at me carefully and said, "You seem lighter." I told her the truth. I stopped carrying what wasn't mine. Sometimes in the evenings I sit by the window with a book I've already read. The city hums. Somewhere, someone is making a mistake they'll later call growth. Somewhere else, someone is learning how to leave without burning the house down. I don't regret loving a younger man. Love doesn't age badly. Expectations do. I also don't regret leaving. Staying would have required shrinking, and I've already done enough of that for one lifetime. Healing in the end didn't feel like winning. It felt like returning to a version of myself that trusted silence, that didn't need witnesses, that understood power as the ability to choose peace without proving you deserve it. I'm not afraid of being alone anymore. I'm afraid of being absent from my own life. So I show up, for breakfast, for walks, for the small decisions that stack up into something solid. I let days pass without meaning too much, and when the apartment fills with the smell of garlic and oil and warmth, I smile, not because of what it once did, but because of what it no longer has to. Some endings don't close a door, they leave it open and let the air move through.